Johnson and governor's race. That's the chief headline tonight, election night across the state in Oklahoma. Good evening once more. I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's video studio alongside my hardworking colleagues, both in the booth here on the desk and back in the newsroom. Felder, Justin Wingerter, and Chris Casteel join us now on the desk. And Chris, I'll start with you. Kevin Stitt has defeated Mick Cornett for the Republican GOP nomination to face Drew Edmondson.
Tulsa businessman came out of nowhere. Nobody had really heard of him really until a few months ago.
And a decisive victory tonight.
It really was. He won in all parts of the state. I was just going county by county, looking at every corner of the state. He won in at least a county, from the Panhandle down to the southeastern, Bryan County, obviously all around the Tulsa area, but down Cotton Country in Jackson County, which is Altus, military town of Lawton, Comanche County. There just really wasn't a part of the state that he won right outside of here in Pottawatomie County, Shawnee, where Mary Fallon grew up. So it was decisive. It really was. Stitt is 45. He'll face Democrat Drew Edmondson, who is 71, and Libertarian Chris Powell. That general election again, November 6th. Thanks to our friends at the Tulsa World for that photo. You spoke with Kevin Stitt tonight, Chris. I did, and his comment was, "I won because people are ready for a change. I beat the status quo again," and yeah, there it is. Right, people are ready for a new leader. I mean, basically, just a stump speech. I won because I'm not an incumbent. I won because I've never been in politics.
You also spoke with his challenger, Drew Edmondson.
Talked to Drew. Drew says he's ready for this matchup. He thinks the key issue will be education. He said Stitt's been wrong on this issue all along. I asked him, do you expect this to be a negative race? He goes, it's going to be ugly, but it's not going to be us. It's not going to be our camp. I intend to focus on the issues.
We also heard from Mick Cornett earlier tonight. We have his concession speech. You can watch that online at newsok.com. He was over at Tower Theater tonight. And Chris, I'll stick with you. Cornett said there's a chance my name will never be on another ballot.
I'd say that's practical. He tried to win a congressional seat in 2006 after he'd been mayor for a couple of years and got beat by Mary Fallon in that. And the statewide race, 44%, and really not. I don't think he came out of it looking that great out, even in his home area. So I don't know exactly what it would be that he would try to run for again.
Yeah, Stitt won, as you said earlier, because he is running as this outsider in a year when voters are revolting against incumbents and revolting against the status quo. He also won because this is a runoff election, a Republican primary that trends very conservative, and Stitt was the deeply conservative candidate running against a moderate in Mick Cornett, who tried to position himself as Stitt's conservative equal, but it was just hard to overcome a political career that has been built on this kind of moderate platform. Right.
One thing I haven't mentioned, and I think I put it in my story tonight that I thought was interesting. Stitt had this slew of endorsements last week that came out, which we don't normally cover. That'd be all we did, but he got former Senator Tom Coburn, who is just an absolute icon of fiscal conservatives, nationwide, but especially in this state. He also got, as endorsers, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who won the 2016 presidential primary here in Oklahoma, and former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum, who won the 2012 Republican presidential primary in Oklahoma. And both of those are very popular figures with social conservatives, especially Santorum. So you've got Coburn, Santorum, Cruz, and the media's not doing a bunch of stories on this, but it's all over his Facebook page. They use social media to promote this to the voter that you were just talking about.
Yeah, Stitt doesn't have much of a political record to fall back on to try to prove that he's conservative, but he's been the same candidate pretty much since day one. And as we've said on earlier shows tonight, Cornett, who got the most votes in the primary in June, and on a with historic turnout on that primary, a medical marijuana question at top of the ballot that drove a lot of turnout, maybe brought out a lot of moderate Republicans. He did well then.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people thought could do well in November. The runoff was always going to be a heavy lift for Cornette.
It was always going to be the biggest hurdle for him.
And I think one of the reasons why he got in the race is I think he kind of saw himself as that kind of pragmatist, that he's been above partisan politics his whole career. I mean, he was always a Republican. He ran as a Republican for Congress. I mean, he was the leader of the Republican Mayors Association, so he didn't run from the Republican label. But as mayor of Oklahoma City, he didn't really, he didn't spend much time talking about a lot of the social conservative issues that are talked about mostly in a governor's race.
If he had gotten into the if Todd Lamb had gotten into the runoff, if Stitt had never been in this race or just had been edged out by Todd Lamb would have been the clear conservative choice in that. He is so hardline on so many, conservative. But would he have been able to withstand the Fallon stuff, his association with Mary Fallon? So I mean, I think he probably would have. I think Lamb would have emerged from a runoff against Cornette, but it's hard to say, because of the strong anti-incumbent feeling right now. It's directed to the top, where he's been. He can't distance himself totally from.
Yeah, I mean, between Cornette and Lamb, Cornette is the outsider.
Yeah.
Between Cornette and Stitt is
right,
the outsider.
Exactly.
Although the Democrats are going to try to paint him as not such, or not one. We saw, National Democratic Governors Association, a statement put out, 3 paragraphs. They mentioned Governor Mary Fallon's name 5 times. So they're going to try to connect Stitt to the Republican Party that's been in control of Oklahoma during some pretty tough budget times.
They have to. And when I interviewed Edmondson a couple of weeks ago, that's exactly what he said. There's no difference between either of the Republican candidates and Mary Fallon.
Justin, one of the stories you're following tonight is that mood towards the incumbents this year.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that as kind of evidence tonight across the board. Some of the congressional races, you've been following those tonight.
Yeah. The Democrats have chosen their people to go up against the incumbent Republicans in 4 of the 5 districts right now. So we'll see. I mean, Democrats have an uphill battle in any district, but less so here in the 5th district, where, as we've talked about before, I mean, Kendra Horn has fundraising prowess. She has an overwhelming victory tonight. I mean, just a complete landslide, and she has built a strong volunteer base, a strong donor base, and she seems to be on a track to give Congressman Russell a good run. And Chris and I have been writing for years that this is a district that is trending Democratic. It is still a likely Republican district with the Republican incumbent, so clearly Russell gets the edge out of the gate. But it is a district where Democrats might be able to compete if they have the right Democrat. They seem to have one who is pretty strong.
They've got a good candidate in a year where Democrats are going to make a lot of gains. They've got probably as good a candidate as they could have in the 5th district.
And they really haven't had a great candidate the last several cycles. I mean, no offense to the gentleman that ran, but they hadn't had a candidate that had a lot of money, that had a lot of organization, and they weren't benefiting from kind of some national Democratic wave. And if the wave is going to reach Oklahoma City, it's going to be a pretty big night for Democrats across the country. But like you said, this is a district that's trending this way, and I think Democrats probably feel like they finally have maybe the candidate that you need to try to flip a still pretty strong leaning Republican seat like this.
If marijuana was just on the ballot.
Yeah.
If it was on every ballot, Democrats could do pretty well. But how many years ago was it that you talked to Tom Cole about this district trending Democratic? It was just a few.
I think it's probably 4 years ago. Yeah, where we talked about, because that's when we started. I think a couple years later is when we did the story about the precinct that the House district that 85 that Cindy Munson turned Democrat after I think the incumbent may have passed away. So we use that as kind of an example of how this area was moving blue.
One of the big stories we've been following all night is the Attorney General's race, and Mike Hunter has pulled that one off.
Yeah, I mean, this was a very narrow victory.
300 votes
for him. Once again, was the theme that it's a tough year for incumbents. Now it looks like he probably is going to emerge on the right side of this. But as the incumbent Attorney General, a much tougher race than normally you would see an incumbent statewide official.
Yeah. I mean, it is just so incredibly close. And probably obviously next to the Bullstead ad, the biggest outcry over in an ad was this one that Drummond ran, using the woman who was killed in Iowa recently. That people were just, some people were just outraged by that, but Drummond actually did better in voting after that ad than he did in some of the early stuff that would have, but votes that would have been cast before that ad ran.
And that picks up on the point you made earlier that for a lot of voters, especially in this very conservative runoff, I mean, a lot of the talking points are on social media. I mean, these are issues, you talk about, the one young woman who's killed in Iowa. You don't see a lot of news stories about it per se, but you see a lot of chatter on social media and a lot of these other issues. And so the campaigns are closely watching that. Like I said, I mean, a Ted Cruz endorsement's not going to get much play maybe in the newspaper, but it is going to get on Facebook. And these are the Facebook issues that candidates are chasing right now.
Exactly.
Grayson Cook was at the press conference of Mike Hunter. We'll have that posted online at News OK later tonight. Ben, another race that was of interest tonight, State School Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister, she moves on.
Yeah, and pretty comfortably. And I think we kind of expected that, even though we've been talking about this theme of a tough election cycle for incumbents. And it's been a kind of a challenging year for education. We saw a 2-week teacher strike in April. Education is a big theme in a lot of the House and Senate races across the state. But Superintendent Hoffmeister has done a pretty good job of positioning herself as an advocate for public schools and for teachers, sometimes in opposition to her own party. Her challenger, Linda Murphy, actually tried to paint her as being too closely connected with the teachers union, which was one of the leaders in the teacher walkout. When she was first elected 4 years ago, she actually beat an incumbent in Janet Barisi, largely off of this wave of frustration amongst educators towards the State Department of Education. So she knows what it looks like to knock off an incumbent, but as the incumbent this time around, she survives pretty comfortably. She'll face Democrat John Cox in the November election, but is likely to probably have another comfortable win then as well.
Hoffmeister's press conference over at the Greens Country Club. Our Tim Willard was there. Hoffmeister says, quote, "My focus stays right on kids no matter who stands against me." Chris, Matt Pinnell won tonight. He will square off for Lieutenant Governor against Anastasia Pittman, and Pinnell won pretty easily tonight.
He did. He won big, and after finishing second to Dana Murphy in the first round, he came from way behind to take that race quite easily. And that's, I don't know, he'll have a lot of money. He's very connected all over the state. He's he's party chairman for a few years. He knows people all over.
38 years old, young guy.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's very young and energetic, and so I think that's probably going to stay in Republican hands.
We'll wrap it up with one final question to these guys, and that's their big takeaway of tonight. Ben, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of takeaways. The big one continues to be, voters' frustration with the status quo, voters' frustration with lawmakers that voted against the tax to fund teacher pay raises. I'm checking our colleague Dale Denwald's Twitter right now, who's tracking 10 incumbents that were in runoff elections. It looks like at least, I think, 5 or 6 of those have already lost. So voters are saying, even in conservative Oklahoma, we've talked about the idea of tax increases, especially of the magnitude we saw in March, being unheard of even a year ago. And a Republican runoff, a very conservative runoff, voters in many of these districts are saying, there might be not endorsing, full throttle on increasing taxes, but are saying the tax increase that was approved in March was something that needed to be done. And if my lawmaker voted against it, I'm not sure that they're the right fit.
Justin, your takeaway.
Steve Russell has a real challenge. The Democratic Party is united behind Kendra Horn right here. She is an impressive candidate in some ways, and one who's going to give Russell a real run. I still give Russell the advantage out of the gate, but this one's going to be interesting to watch the next couple months.
And Chris, the final word, your takeaway.
I would say, as Ben was, I think Republicans cleaned house. They did a lot of house cleaning in the last 2 rounds, primary and runoff tonight. They've gotten rid of some people that might have been a problem in the general election race for them. So I actually think that rather than looking at like a lot of the Republican losses of incumbents as a negative thing for them, it may have been the good thing for them. They may now be able to get enthusiastic behind some of these candidates, whereas they might not have been able to have the same kind of energy for incumbents that they were tired of, But now that they've got these new candidates, I think there's a chance they rally around them, and it's a very, very tough fight in some of these races versus with the Democrats versus Republicans.
It's good stuff. We've had good content all night long here in the Oklahoma's video studio. You can rewatch those if you want on demand at newsok.com. Big thanks to Paige Dillard, Greg Singleton, Todd Frazier in the booth, Tim Money, Grayson Cook in the field from the video crew. To these gentlemen, Ben Felder, Justin Wingerter, Chris Casteel, and Dale Denwalt, along with Brian Dean from the State Election Board who joined us earlier. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm Dave Morris. Thanks for watching. More election coverage can be found in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com.